Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, there is more and more talk about this thing called the Internet of Things. That refers to much more than the phenomenon of contemporary technology connecting so many people in so many places, abroad and locally. But it's a broad scale that connects more than just electronically. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. I am Chris William, and someone recently said that a good part of this recent financial market volatility could be attributed to the instantaneous connectivity of all of us and our reality as it is now. So, if we interpolate that onto other aspects of society, of business, of life in general, what is the effect? We'll discuss that in the context of our current politics and business, and later on, IT infrastructure CEO David Jones.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Mark Reid Davis, Director of the Pickens Innovation Center, Ollie Chandhok, Market President and Publisher of Triad Business Journal, and special guest David Jones, CEO of Peak 10. Here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Gentlemen, good to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Let's start with something politically. In North Carolina, in South Carolina, job one, at least for the General Assemblies, they say, is going to be transportation. Now, that's a fairly broad, you can say transportation infrastructure. So, Ollie, you've seen this state now for a while. There is a difference between saying it's going to get done and getting it done. Do you feel like North Carolina is going to be able to put in place what they need to get done to get transportation fixed in towns like Charlotte and Raleigh and Asheville and Wilmington? Can we get this structure where we need to get it for growth?
Chris, I think we can. I think we're headed in the right direction. There are things in place that are where we're starting to see some traction. I'm currently in the Triad in Greensboro, Winston-Salem area, and there's a lot of talk about a loop around, really around the whole region to connect to Piedmont Triad International Airport. One of the major industries in the Triad is that transportation and logistics, and in order for that industry to thrive, we've got to have a loop to where a lot of the businesses are, the industrial type folks, and just we have to complete that. And I think that those things are in the works. I think our leadership is addressing it. It's just taking a little bit longer than it probably could.
Yeah, and Speaker Lucas in South Carolina, the State House, has said that was going to be job one. I know the Senate somewhat agrees, maybe in a different way. Mark, do you get a sense that South Carolina is going to be able to prioritize this and where, no pun intended, where the rubber meets the road and get this done this year?
I think so. We have a large number of automotive companies, and car transportation is important, but there are two other types of transportation that are being birthed in our state. The first are the greenways and the blueways, and I come from Pickens, that's a small town connected with Clemson and Easley, and we've interconnected those with green trails for horses and for jogging, and we have old railways that are turned into bikeways for bicycles. So our towns are becoming interconnected even in the most rural areas, like where I live, through these means. And then secondly, there was a movement in 1998 to connect the coast to Greenville via railway. There's been talk in the state that this will happen, and this will provide a very easy way to get across the state and for commerce to be born.
And to press you on this a little bit, you're talking about it, and a lot of your colleagues are talking about it. But do you get the sense that legislators are going to make the decisions to fund it the way it needs to be funded?
I think legislators will fund it when they see that their constituents will vote for them in order to get into office. So I believe that's kind of the push that's taking place. There's an awful lot of automotive legislation that's taking place in our state legislature. I'm in charge of birthing entrepreneurs through the Innovation Hub, and one of them is for mopeds and scooters, which are used on our coastline and also in the small towns for night shift workers. And we've created a lighting and GPS system to help with that. And the great support that we received from the General Assembly is appreciated in South Carolina. And I think that's because the voters and the entrepreneurs have begun to call the legislatures who are coming to my office and taking part in this type of innovation. And so it's critical for this success that this level of communication be there, and that's part of why I'm on the show today, is to try to be part of this voice. Yeah,
you know, let's unpack this innovation entrepreneurial spirit a little bit more, Ollie, and Mark, I want you to weigh in on this as well. So, you know, the profile of someone that is squarely in the center of that tends to be a younger demographic. Right. A lot of passion, a lot of great ideas. This same demographic also has an issue around student loan overhang. Does this, and you had a story in the Triad Business Journal about this. Does the student loan overhang, is it mortally punitive to this spirit of entrepreneurship?
I think so. I think that younger demographic comes out typically with a substantial amount of debt. I think mortally punitive is strong. I think they have an opportunity to be a little bit creative in entrepreneurship. I think, you know, I'm seeing a lot of centers like Mark's. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing, you know, and I'm going back to Greensboro here, but I'm thinking about we have what we call the Nussbaum Center. We have a pretty creative makerspace that's building up in the southern part of the town, and their entrepreneurial efforts, that spirit, is shifting into different things. It's not necessarily the traditional tech innovation, those kind of things. There's some really cool things happening, at least in the Triad, from what I can tell you. I think they just have to adapt to different ways to feed that entrepreneurial spirit. So punitive, sure, it hinders probably where they're trying to go, but I think they can feed that spirit by looking at different ways to be entrepreneurial.
Mark, how much of a liability do student loans do in this space around entrepreneurialism and innovation? Same question.
Well, we had 268 people apply in the first 6 months in our center, which is a massive amount. A third of them were 50 and above, and obviously it does not apply. But for those that were 30 to 40, many of them still had significant debt. And for those 20 to 40, many of them were PhD students. And debt is something that impacts entrepreneurship. And it's a big problem because, you know, my alma mater, where I went to school, is now about 3 times the cost that it was when I graduated in 2000. And this causes a lot of legacy debt, and people don't feel that they can get over it when they have that legacy of debt. And so debt forgiveness and a different way of approaching these loans is important. I've been living abroad for 23 years, and I've been in countries where this is not an issue. Living in Europe and parts of South America and Asia Pacific, I've seen places where the government protects their students. They protect the heart and soul of their students so that they don't have these debts. And in Singapore, where I've been based for the past 10 years, the students have a lot of support from the government, not only to not have the debt, but also they get money to buy the technology and the office space to be entrepreneurial. And we need to move towards that in America for people to have the heart to be able to be entrepreneurs again.
You know, and I don't want to go down this road too far because this is a very in-depth dialogue, but you both live in the front yards of some serious financial institutions in the Carolinas, certainly in the Triad, certainly in the upstate of South Carolina. Are we getting to a point in those areas and in this country that it is prohibitive for students in general, when I'm talking about the cost of an education, and Mark, you just referenced Singapore, but is it, from a comparative analysis, is the U.S. and are the Carolinas falling behind competitively?
I think that for me, the Carolinas are not falling behind, but they're not doing well, and they can do a lot better. And for the students that come to the center that ask me, I have to be honest with them. You know, do I go to a management consultancy career with Deloitte or Accenture or McKinsey to pay off my debt, or do I start a company that's going to put me into further debt? And when our students are faced with these kinds of decisions and they're 22 years old, it's a painful decision for them to have to make, and only they can make it. I can't make it for them, but I have to lay the facts out. And the truth is, in my experience, only 1 in 6 companies succeed. So the failure rate is significantly against the student. But the student has to make that decision. And in order for entrepreneurship to foster and grow, we have to have a better connection between what they're doing. Now, the thing that I think my state, South Carolina, has done well is BMW and Michelin and many of the companies there provide internships that take off a lot of the burden of debt. And so the student is able not only to get a work experience with an engineering firm, but also to have a freedom when they get out of school to be able to have no debt. And I think that's one of the best things that we can be doing as a state and as a nation.
Okay, we're going to have to bring our guest on. I know you're heartbroken. You don't get to answer that question.
I was itching.
Yeah, what he said, right? Stay with us, guys. Thank you. Next week on this program, we're calling it The Spirits of the Carolinas. And no, it's not about rabid fanship around the Carolina Panthers or any other team, but it's actually about brewing, about distilling in the Carolinas and what's going on there. On our program, Palmetto Brewing, Shelton Vineyards, Dark Corner Distillery, and Red Clay Cider Works will be represented about that very growing industry in North and South Carolina. And then in 2 weeks, she is the fairly newly minted president of Columbia College. Beth Dindorf will be here. Peak 10 is one of those companies that can either make or break your organization, hopefully the former, with server locations in those cities, hopefully the prior. However, with server locations in 10 cities, it is a national IT infrastructure provider which includes servers and iCloud-related services for businesses and beyond. Joining us now is Peak 10 Chief Executive Officer David Jones, one of the healthiest CEOs in the Carolinas. Thank you, David. Welcome. And I know that because you've been running marathons since you were about 6 years old or something.
That's a long time.
Anyway, David, good to have you on the program. David, you know, we use this term, the Internet of Things, and it's become kind of a catchphrase and a cute little headline, but not to put words in your mouth, but it seems to be much more of a reality. What is the Internet of Things, and how do you see this kind of unfolding?
It is very much a reality in our world, and it's something that you look strategically is where companies like ours, as well as individual consumers, are headed. It is everything, because as it implies, it means everything is connected. It means that there is some way to determine what's going on in minutia, if you will. And what that means to us is that it pushes, you know, we obviously have a lot of infrastructure in place. We've invested a lot in that. And what it does is it pushes further to the edge how information is gathered, assimilated, and used, as opposed to think of it as being in a data center and a server when you use your cell phone or you go and you log into certain aspects of a resource that you're trying to get to. You don't even know where it is. And that really kind of defines Internet of Things. You know, even your grocery store picks up your buying habits, and they don't do that in the grocery store. It's in a data center somewhere, maybe one of mine, which would be nice, but you access that information. So it's there again, the Internet of Things is pushing information to you at a much, much more rapid pace than you've ever seen it before. And how we adapt to that as consumers drives how we do business. So it is very encompassing. In my world, what it does, again, is it pushes more out to the edge of the internet where a lot of transactions are taking place. You can even translate it back into things like public cloud, where you go in and you may just pay for what you use, as opposed to being on a contract where your mission critical services may sit. So we have a strategic plan that is related to that, because we see that we have to manage so much more of our customers' interface to the Internet of Things than we ever did before. It's dynamic, it's exciting.
Well, and you can't not think of things like privacy and
Absolutely.
access. Has our technology gotten so far above what we're able to ethically compute as individuals? In other words, privacy is an issue. And I'll give you an example. So Amazon has a thing called Echo.
Right.
And it's always listening in your home.
Yep.
When you think about that, it's a little unsettling, and that's just one issue. And we're not picking on Amazon, but how? So, David, I guess maybe not a fair question for you, but how do we need to think about access and privacy, and how do we balance privacy and access with being ubiquitous and all connected?
What it does is it places a greater burden on you, the user, to manage that, and that's what a lot of us are not comfortable with. We never thought we had to worry about that. I have Echo as well. But when I set that up, I made sure I knew what it had access to and didn't. There are things that you can do that you don't really think about, but if you translate that over, back to the other point, the Internet of Things, you're more responsible now for how your information is disseminated and what you communicate with. Great example is a friend of mine and his wife both have iPhones, and he used his iPhone to do some things maybe he shouldn't have been doing. Guess who can see that? His wife. He learned the hard way.
You care to elaborate on that?
No, I won't. I won't give any names or locations. But that's a simple example. But as we want more freedom to do more things, there's an obligation for us to manage information ourselves. And that is dramatic change for how we interact in our worlds today. And that's where we're headed as a country and and as a business. And for us, for my company, it's really great because it's another opportunity to create value, because we can provide the resources and help our customers manage where their information is, where it's going, and how it migrates from one area to the other. That's one of the things that I have had a lot of discussion internally about is what we're talking about is migration of data. It's really your information is migrating somewhere. You'd better be able to control where it goes. That's a whole new thing that we really are just beginning to see that much of now, and it's related to security and denial of service attacks, all sorts of things that people can get access to, some of it malicious, others of it just interesting to know. And there are a number of things where data has been hacked, not necessarily just in credit cards, but in other resources, other websites that people don't want anybody to know that they're there, those sorts of things, and they extort from that. So it's a wide open west kind of thing that people may not realize how significant it is today.
Ollie, question?
Yeah, you knew I had something, right?
Yeah.
So
He was
Dave,
jumping
you
up and
touched
down.
on as you transition to kind of that as more of our information is out there, you have to be guarded almost. And in our world, our product is information, and so we're trying to deliver the information. I'd say 2.5, 3 years ago, we had major shifts in our newsroom to where we went what we call internally digital first, and so the shift became we had to deliver that information. In the old days, we delivered our information in print every week on Friday, and that's the way our newsrooms operated. They'd pick up a story, they'd hold on to it, and work on it and groom it until Friday. Nowadays, something happens, we get a big story, it is being pushed out immediately. Before that even gets pushed out, if it happens within 20 minutes, we are going back and forth on how do we deliver this information. Do we put it in a breaking news email? Are we putting it on a website? The Internet of Things has changed the way we operate internally dramatically. Everything that we do has to be, we have to be cautious, and we have to think of the implications of not only the information itself, but how we deliver it.
And what's the question?
The question?
The question for David, yeah.
He was saying, I agree.
I was backing him up.
But the thing about that, when you look at what you do, as well as Google News, et cetera, which is kind of a competitor in a way,
right?
Keywords drives more of your business today than you would have ever expected it to. I know in our case, when Peak 10 shows up in an article in the Business Journal, I get 3 emails or tweets from within my company. Hey, did you see this? It's in the, and I'm going like, well, no, because I'm actually working. I'm not over here. But
not on my phone. Yeah, question?
13 of my companies are technology companies that have an application and a widget working together, and we're trying to make decisions, and I'm trying to help guide them on what server, Google, Amazon, the interface that you're talking about. Can you please give me some guidance on how to do that effectively?
Are you saying where they go to develop that?
Yeah, so for example, we found that Amazon may be less expensive up front, but more expensive on. Google may be less expensive, more expensive up front, but long term. And so I'm not aware of how to help price them, because that affects the users of their apps, that affects the price point. So you have that strategic piece in your business.
Yeah, in fact, I would tell you, Mark, most of my customers are not dependent on a public cloud solution. Most of mine have mission critical solutions with us to manage for them. So they'll use an Amazon or an Azure or other services for specific things. And in your case, I think there are some alternatives which we can talk about actually very close to you in Greenville. There are a couple of friends of mine who are providers who would, you may already know them, but they will give you the capability of doing the things you need to do without having to go out into the wide open world or of an Amazon, et cetera. And I'm talking about dedicating space, compute, storage, network capabilities for your companies. Why would they do that? Potential customer down the road. And we do that here in Charlotte. So that's where it's sort of the pay it forward for companies like mine, which were very entrepreneurial when we started. We still claim to be, although at 400 people, sometimes I wonder. But it's being able to unlock that into the communities that's important for those of us that are based in the Carolinas. And I sort of wove that around, but what you said is exactly right. Amazon appears to be cheap on the front end or inexpensive, but the deeper you get into it, it's not. We've actually run a lot of studies that have shown, for obvious reasons, that it's not that less expensive. It's actually less expensive to you to be somewhere that you have dedicated infrastructure for what you need.
But won't that work as well? Aren't the financial markets ultimately non-discriminatory and will end up finding the lowest cost provider?
Absolutely.
So why is Amazon continuing to do well financially?
They have such a massive business. There is a huge business community out there that have their own developers, larger companies that have their, Netflix being one, for example. It's one of their largest, Amazon's largest customers. They drive so much data through what they do, and obviously, you know how they set that up. It was they had all these servers and this infrastructure for their own business, which is still run on that. But when they started out, I think they went through 2 or 3 years of losing enormous amounts of money. But as they've grown and the ease with which you can go in and use their services has been attractive from an entrepreneurial standpoint and a development standpoint. So companies did not have to have that infrastructure. A Bank of America did not have to have that infrastructure internally. They could go outside and use that for what they needed, and it serves a purpose and a need. I don't need it, like a highway we were talking about earlier. It's an interstate. I need 6 lanes to do this, and I can't get 6 lanes anywhere else. So I'll go there to get it. So that's really what drove it and continues to drive it. I have a lot of customers who use a public cloud solution. We don't provide one because it isn't enough demand for what we do, but they will use that. Lending Tree, great example. They use it. They do development around products and services, bring it back in, resident it in their infrastructure that we manage for them.
We have literally have about a minute left. It's gone that fast. No, there's just a lot of information to kind of pile into this 5-pound bag. Yeah. Literally in about a minute, David, as a CEO, forget about the IT part, as a CEO, do you have trouble finding talent? Is that workforce skills gap real?
It is real. We're in an engineering and development technology. That's what our workforce is. It is hard to find. We're actually doing a lot now to try to improve how we identify that talent through different degrees of testing, if you will, to make sure we identify it and don't spend time talking to people who are not qualified for what we need to do. And I fundamentally believe there is a solution out there, but there's no quick fix. The things that Mark's doing is a great example of enlightening. We actually bring Mecklenburg public school teachers into our data center to show them what we do and where the jobs are. so they can help their students focus on that.
That's going to have to be the last word. I know you got so much more to share, and we'll have to try to get you back on the program before another 5 years goes by. But thank you, David. Sure. Good to see you. Thank you. Mark, welcome. Welcome home. Good to have you here, Ollie.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.